She began writing the letters on a night when the power was out again, when the room was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping on the rusted zinc roof and the soft breathing of her children asleep on one thin mattress. And the reason she started was simple and terrifying, because she did not know if she would always be there to say these things out loud. Her name was Grace, a single mother raising 3 children on her own, and as she sat on the edge of the bed holding a pen that barely worked, she felt a fear settle deep inside her chest. Not the loud kind of fear that makes you run, but the silent kind that makes you prepare. Life had not unfolded the way Grace once imagined when she was younger, when she believed love would stay, when she believed hard work always led to safety, because somewhere along the way her husband left. Promises faded, jobs became harder to find, prices rose, and responsibility remained heavy and unshared. Every morning she woke before the sun, washed her face with cold water, tied her scarf tightly, and stepped outside into a world that demanded strength even when she felt empty. And every night she returned with sore feet, aching hands, and a heart full of worry. She tried hard not to pass on to her children. She worried about sickness, about accidents, about one mistake turning into a disaster, about what would happen if she could not come home one day, and that fear followed her even during moments of laughter, even when her children smiled, because loving deeply means having more to lose. That night she reached into her old bag, the one she carried everywhere, pulled out an unused exercise book, tore out blank pages, and carefully wrote each child's name at the top of a different page, her hands shaking not from cold, but from the weight of the moment. She told herself the letters were only a precaution, something she hoped would never be needed, but deep inside she knew they were her way of staying present, even in uncertainty. She started with her eldest son, Daniel, who tried to act grown even when fear lived behind his eyes, who watched her closely as if learning survival by observation, and she wrote slowly in simple words, telling him that being strong did not mean never crying, that strength could look like asking for help, that kindness was not weakness, and that protecting his siblings did not mean forgetting himself. She wrote that life would test him, that anger might feel easier than sadness, but that choosing love, patience, and honesty would build more than anger ever could. And as she wrote, tears dropped onto the paper, blurring the ink, and she wiped them away gently, whispering quiet apologies to a future she prayed would never arrive. Then she turned to the second letter, the one for her daughter Anna, who asked many questions, who noticed small changes, who already carried worry in her young eyes. And Grace wrote about confidence, about not shrinking her voice to make others comfortable, about knowing her worth even when the world tried to make her feel small. She wrote that beauty was not something decided by mirrors or approval, that her value did not depend on being chosen, that struggle did not mean she deserved less, and she urged her to be kind, but never silent in the face of unfairness. The words flowed faster now, as if once her heart opened it could not close again, and for a moment Grace forgot the darkness, forgot the rain, forgot the fear, and focused only on pouring love onto paper. The last letter was for Samuel, her youngest, the child who still clung to her hand in public, who fell asleep on her chest, who believed she could solve any problem just by being there, and this letter hurt the most, because even imagining him reading it felt like a betrayal. She wrote about joy, about curiosity, about not allowing hardship to steal his softness, about laughing freely, forgiving himself when he failed, and trusting that his heart was enough. She told him stories he was too young to remember, about how he used to hum before he could speak, about how he smiled even when there was nothing to smile about how his presence brought light into the darkest moments, and she promised him that no matter where she was, he would never be alone. As the candle burned low, Grace realized the letters were not only for her children, but also for herself, reminders of what truly mattered when everything else felt unstable. She folded each letter carefully, placed them inside envelopes she had saved from old bills, wrote their names again slowly, pressing the pen hard as if that could make the paper stronger, and hid them at the bottom of her bag, the one thing she never left behind. The days that followed did not suddenly become easier. In fact, they became harder, because hardship rarely waits, and Asha faced missed meals, sickness that lingered, long walks for small opportunities, and moments when hope felt fragile and easily broken. There were mornings she struggled to stand, evenings she cried quietly so her children would not hear, and nights when fear whispered that love might not be enough. Yet even in those moments, the letters gave her a strange strength. Not because she wanted them read, but because they reminded her of her purpose. Sometimes she reread parts of them when the children were away, letting her own words guide her, choosing patience when anger rose, choosing gentleness when exhaustion pushed her towards silence, and slowly she began to live the advice she had written. The children noticed small changes, how she listened more carefully, how she hugged longer, how she said, "I love you," more often and more clearly. And though they did not know why, they felt it, because love spoken with intention changes the air in a room. One afternoon, after a long day, Rohan asked why she always told them she loved them before leaving the house, and Asha smiled softly and said, because love should never be assumed. Weeks passed, then months, and life remained uncertain, but something inside Asha shifted, not because the danger disappeared, but because she faced it with intention instead of fear. She still worried, still planned carefully, still counted coins before buying food, but she also laughed more, dreamed quietly, and allowed herself to imagine futures filled with possibility instead of endings. The letters stayed hidden, untouched, their purpose not yet needed, and Asha hoped they never would be, but she was grateful they existed because they proved that even in fear, love could be deliberate. One evening during another power outage, the children gathered close and asked for stories, and instead of telling them tales of heroes and magic, Asha spoke about ordinary people who kept going, who loved deeply even when life was unfair. As she spoke, she realized she was teaching them not through paper, but through presence. There were still nights when fear returned suddenly, when she lay awake listening to her children breathe, wondering what tomorrow would bring. But now that fear no longer controlled her, because she had already faced it and answered it with love. As time passed, the children grew in small, visible ways. Rohan became taller and quieter, carrying responsibility in his posture, but also learning to smile again. Priya became more confident, asking questions without apology and helping her brothers with gentle firmness. And Vikram slowly loosened his grip on Asha's hand, learning that the world could be safe while still returning to her arms at night. Grace noticed these changes with a mixture of pride and fear, because growth meant movement forward, and movement forward always came with uncertainty, but she held on to hope anyway. Some days she found better work. Other days she came home with nothing but stories and encouragement, and through it all she kept choosing honesty with her children, explaining hardship in ways they could understand without burdening them with despair. She taught them how to save small coins, how to share food without counting too closely, how to speak kindly to themselves when things went wrong, and slowly the home, though still small and imperfect, became filled with a quiet strength. Sometimes Grace thought about the letters and wondered if she should destroy them, if keeping them meant inviting fear, but each time she touched the bag and felt the paper inside, she felt grounded instead of afraid, because the letters were not about dying, they were about living with intention. One afternoon, when Anna helped her wash clothes and Samuel splashed water playfully while Daniel hung wet fabric on the line, Grace watched her children laugh together and felt something loosen inside her chest. She realized then that the letters had already done their work, not by being read, but by changing the way she loved, the way she spoke, the way she showed up every day even when she was tired. The fear that once pushed her to write had transformed into a quiet resolve, a promise to herself that she would keep choosing love loudly while she was still there to do so. Years continued to move forward slowly, unevenly, but always forward. And though Grace never stopped worrying entirely, she learned how to carry fear without letting it rule her, understanding that hope was not pretending things were easy, but deciding they were worth facing. The letters remained hidden, their edges softening with time, their ink slightly faded, but their meaning stayed strong because they represented a mother's decision to prepare not for loss, but for continuity, to ensure that no matter what storms came, her children would always know where they came from, what they were worth, and how deeply they were loved. And in that knowledge, Grace found peace, not because the future was guaranteed, but because love had already been planted deeply enough to grow on its own, and that was enough.